For over a decade now, superhero films have dominated the box office and have completely changed the way that we view films, but recently, it seems like that the genre is dying. But before we get into that, here is a history on the films. Although they weren't the first superhero films to ever be made, the films that definitely launched the superhero genre is Richard Donner's Superman in 1978 and Tim Burton's Batman in 1989. Although these types of films wouldn't dominate the box office like they do today, they laid the groundwork for the future. The films that would truly revolutionize the genre and the industry in general were Bryan Singer's X-Men in 2000, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man in 2002, Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins in 2005, and by far the most important one, Jon Favreau's Iron Man in 2008. What's crazy is that all of these directors had major hits before their comic book films, except for Jon Favreau. Bryan Singer had The Usual Suspects, Sam Raimi had the Evil Dead trilogy, and Christopher Nolan had Memento, but Favreau had Elf. Elf is a great film, by the way, but compared to these other films, it just does not pale in comparison. But what made Iron Man so much more successful than the other films was particularly due to its underdog story. Iron Man at the time wasn't as big as he is today. Then he was a B-level superhero, so to base your entire franchise on this character was a very major risk. Not only that, but Robert Downey Jr.'s career wasn't in a great spot, with him recently being released from prison on drug charges. And all of that on top of a little-known director. On paper, this seems like a flop, but this somehow ended up being the most successful hit of them all. Now, the major reason as to why this did so well is mainly because it captures the goofiness of the Raimi films and how funny it is, in particular with Robert Downey Jr.'s performance, but also it combines the realistic elements from Singer's and Nolan's films. In general, this is a very fun movie that is entertaining no matter how many times you watch it. It has that lightning in a bottle feel that not many films have today. Then Nick Fury was in the post-credit scene and nothing has been the same since. Before we move on, an interesting thing about this scene is that in the original version, Fury mentions radioactive spider bites and mutants, which is really crazy because obviously the original plan for the cinematic universe was for Raimi's Spider-Man films and Singer's X-Men films to cross over at some point, and because of the living hell that is the film rights to Marvel characters, that didn't work out, but it's still cool to think about how it could have gone down.
As if gamma accidents, radioactive bug bites, and assorted mutants weren't enough, I have to deal with a spoiled brat who doesn't play well with others and wants to keep all his toys to himself.
A couple films later, we got the first major crossover film in Joss Whedon's The Avengers in 2012. Now, I've been talking about cinematic universes a lot, and let me briefly break down the history of the cinematic universe while I'm also breaking down the history of superhero movies, while I'm also breaking it down sexual style. That was funny when I wrote it, but now that I'm saying it out loud, it's really not funny at all. Essentially, a cinematic universe is a bunch of other franchises coming together to be one big franchise. Although the MCU is often credited as being the first cinematic universe, and although it definitely pioneered it, it was not the first. The first cinematic universe started in 1994 with Kevin Smith's Clerks. Clerks is an indie comedy film that ended up garnering a lot of attention through festivals and kickstarted the career of Kevin Smith, who is a massive comic book fan, and he used his love of comic books to influence his films. In Clerks, Kevin Smith and Jason Mewes plays the self-described R2-D2 and 3CPO characters of the film, that being Jay and Silent Bob. Well, after the success of Clerks, Kevin Smith got to work on his second film, Mallrats, in 1995, with completely different characters, but the characters that connected this to Clerks is Jay and Silent Bob. In the View Askew universe, as it's called, there are a lot of returning actors like Brian O'Halloran, Jeff Anderson, Ben Affleck, Jason Lee, Harley Quinn Smith, and Joey Lauren Adams. But they always play different characters except for Kevin Smith and Jason Mewes, who always plays Jay and Silent Bob. So when a film is directed by Kevin Smith and has Jay and Silent Bob, it is always canon to the View Askew universe. So yeah, that's the history of the cinematic universe, and the first cinematic universe, the View Askew universe, is what I would say if I were a liar. Actually, the first cinematic universe was in 1931 with Dracula and the Universal monster films. I don't have much to say about them because I haven't seen a lot of them, but I guess I'll get back on topic now. Although the MCU didn't invent the cinematic universe, it definitely perfected it. Everything was consistent and everything set up to the greater narrative, both in terms of the overall story, like the Avengers, or in terms of personal conflict, like Iron Man 3. Now, I've been talking an awful lot about Marvel. Where does DC fit in all this? Well, because of the success of Iron Man and other MCU films at the time, Warner Brothers wanted Christopher Nolan to make his final film in his Batman trilogy, The Dark Knight Rises, lead into a cinematic universe, but because Nolan has, artistic integrity, he opted out of it. That was Warner Brothers' first attempt at a cinematic universe for DC. Their second attempt was a 2011 film called Green Lantern, directed by Martin Campbell. This film bombed like hard. Critics and audiences hated it, and not only that, but it made $220 million at the box office despite costing $200 million to make. The film starred Ryan Reynolds, and to this day he still makes fun of the film. So Warner Brothers' third attempt at a DC cinematic universe was the 2013 film Man of Steel, directed by Zack Snyder. Snyder has had some success with Warner Brothers in the past with Watchmen and 300, plus the writing team behind the Dark Knight trilogy, that being David S. Goyer and Christopher Nolan, wrote this, and Nolan, who directed the Dark Knight trilogy, backed Snyder himself. And finally, there was success. Despite being divided critically, the film did well financially. By this time, the MCU was in quote-unquote phase 2, and Marvel Studios was bought by Disney. At this point of the MCU, they were starting to hone their craft, and patterns started to show up in the MCU. They weren't really noticeable, nor were they really a problem, but this would end up being detrimental to the MCU in the future, but we'll get to that. During phase 2, we got what is almost universally considered to be one of, if not the best MCU film, and that is 2014's Guardians of the Galaxy, directed by James Gunn. If Iron Man was a B-level superhero, the Guardians of the Galaxy was like a Z-level superhero team. They were a major risk, but they found the perfect director. James Gunn, who is very much in the same vein as a Sam Raimi, started out making campy horror films like Slither, and he's very passionate about comic books, as he literally made a superhero movie before he ever started the MCU. James Gunn's past and combining other genres with comedy led to Guardians of the Galaxy being a sci-fi comedy, and this decision was perfect for this film because it completely embraces the absurdity that is the Guardians, and that differentiated itself from other MCU films. Where the other MCU films had moments of levity, Guardians of the Galaxy was straight up a comedy, and because of the massive success of that film, the MCU got more and more comedic. Although Avengers Age of Ultron was successful, it wasn't nearly as successful as the first film, and due to creative differences and pressure of the massive film that would be Infinity War, Joss Whedon left Marvel, and the Russo brothers, who had worked on Captain America the Winter Soldier and the upcoming Captain America Civil War, took over. As I said earlier, the film rights to Marvel characters was a living hell. Disney owned the majority of Marvel characters, but Fox had the rights to X-Men and Fantastic Four. Universal has the rights to the Hulk, but they had a deal with Marvel to bring him in the MCU, and Sony has the rights to Iron Man. Both Sony and Fox have had a lot of ups and downs trying to get their own cinematic universes started with their Marvel properties, but Sony hit an ultimate low with The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which is their attempt at launching a Spider-Man cinematic universe. Because of the fan demand for Spider-Man to end up in the MCU, Sony caved in and they signed a deal similar to the MCU's deal with Universal to have Spider-Man appear in the MCU, with his first appearance being in Captain America Civil War. This caused fans to go nuts and rejoiced everywhere. This was a massive W for superhero fans across the world. Over at DC, Man of Steel was divided, but the second film in the DC Extended Universe, 2016's Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, also being directed by Zack Snyder, was critically panned, with it being a meme punching bag. Because of the backlash of BVS, Warner Brothers was pressuring Snyder to make his films more akin to the MCU, which directly went against Snyder's style. Not to mention, Nolan did not write the script for BVS. Because of the pressure from Warner Brothers, they completely changed the upcoming DC film Suicide Squad, directed by David Ayer, while the film was in post-production, and Suicide Squad would get even more hate than BVS. DC would find success with 2017's Wonder Woman, directed by Patty Jenkins, but that's just a small victory for DC. In what is easily one of the most tragic stories in the film industry, while filming Justice League, Zack Snyder's daughter had taken her own life, causing Zack Snyder to exit the project. Because Warner Brothers is greedy and doesn't care about artistic integrity or just like humans in general, they immediately hired Joss Whedon to not only film the scenes that Snyder didn't direct, but also rework pretty much the entire story. Warner Brothers and Joss Whedon took advantage of Snyder's tragedy and used it to make his films more accessible to general audiences. Look, I'm not even a fan of Zack Snyder's films, but this is just disgusting, and Whedon deserves to have his career taken away from him, especially now that a lot has come out from not only the Justice League cast, but also the cast from his previous work, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, that he was abusive on set. People noticed pretty much immediately that Snyder's direction was not visible at all in this film, and thus the hashtag release the Snyder Cut movement started. In my opinion, 2017 to 2019 was the peak time to be a fan of superhero films. For starters, Disney was beginning to acquire Fox, which would mean that they would have the rights to X-Men and Fantastic Four characters, and after the last few X-Men universe films, the X-Men would join the MCU. And I guess since I've been talking about the MCU and the DCEU, I should talk about the X-Men universe and the Spider-Man universe. So as I said, in 2000, X-Men came out, and because of the success, we got two other films, X2 United and X-Men The Last Stand. X2 is widely regarded as one of the best X-Men films, but The Last Stand... yeah. The original plan for the X-Men franchise going forward was to do prequel origin stories for some of the X-Men characters, the first of which being X-Men Origins Wolverine, and it did not go well. Although Wolverine would get sequels in the future, the origin prequel thing died with the first Wolverine film. When it truly became a cinematic universe was with X-Men First Class and the Wolverine, and then X-Men Days of Future Past combined both the past and the present films. After this we got Deadpool, Logan, Dark Phoenix, and the New Mutants. One major problem with the X-Men universe is its continuity. Where the MCU and even the DCEU had a clear timeline for the most part, the X-Men universe had like 3 or 4 different timelines going on at once, with the original timeline being X-Men to the Wolverine, and then the new timeline, which is Days of Future Past to the New Mutants, I guess, and then the Deadpool films, which is in its own continuity, and then Logan, which is in its own continuity. None of it makes sense, and although I have a lot of fondness for this franchise, I think it was for the best that it died. And then there's this Spider-Man stuff. Because of the negative criticism of Spider-Man 3, at the time, Sony decided to scrap Raimi's Spider-Man 4 and completely reboot the franchise with The Amazing Spider-Man. At first, Sony's intentions was to make their new Spider-Man iteration more akin to Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, but because of the massive success of the MCU, they decided to go for something more in the line of that. So The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was to set up The Amazing Spider-Man 3, a Sinister Six movie, a Venom movie, a Black Cat movie, and an Aunt May movie, and I am not kidding. As I said earlier, because of the failure of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Sony made a deal with Marvel to where Spider-Man can appear in the MCU. Sony, still wanting to make their own cinematic universe, scrapped everything but their Venom film, and based their entire cinematic universe on Venom. Technically, this universe is called Sony's Spider-Man universe, but A, I'm not calling it that, and B, Spider-Man isn't even in the universe, so I'm just not calling it that. I'm calling it the Venom universe. The Venom universe, as of writing this video, only has 3 films: Venom, Venom Let There Be Carnage, and Morbius, and there's not a whole lot to say, and yeah, there's yet to be a good one. Anyways, back to 2017 to 2019. 2017 had Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Spider-Man Homecoming, Thor Ragnarok, Logan, and Wonder Woman. 2018 had Black Panther, Avengers Infinity War, Deadpool 2, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and Aquaman. And 2019 had Avengers Endgame, Spider-Man Far From Home, Shazam, and Joker. Wonder Woman, Aquaman, and Shazam all marked a turning point in the DCEU, where the movies started being good. Plus, Joker was the first R-rated film to earn $1 billion, making it one of the most financially profitable films to ever be made because it only had a $50 million budget. The X-Men universe was closing out with Logan being the definitive ending for the universe, and it was an amazing spot to end on. Into the Spider-Verse not only changed superhero movies as a genre, but animation in general. And Infinity War and Endgame were the movie events of both 2018 and 19, and they not only met but exceeded fans' expectations. And then something happened. Other than Birds of Prey, which I totally forgot existed, The New Mutants, which no one has ever seen, and Wonder Woman 1984, which sucked majorly, 2020 had no superhero films. This was also the first year since 2009 where the MCU had no new projects coming out. So in terms of superhero movies, or just movies in general, we got pretty much nothing. Now this is where you may be thinking, well, that's why the genre is dying. COVID, and that is just not true. If that were the case, these movies would be bombing in 2021 and not 2023, so that can't be it. But 2021 was an overload of superhero stuff, in particular from the MCU. But starting with DC, because of the mass outcry from fans, Warner Brothers caved in and allowed Snyder to finish the Snyder Cut, and we got Zack Snyder's Justice League, which I made a video about, and it sucks, but you can watch it if you want. Also, a little bit of history here. At some point in time, James Gunn was fired from Guardians Volume 3 because of jokes he made on Twitter, and he went to DC to not only write but direct a Suicide Squad sequel called The Suicide Squad, which was pretty much a soft reboot for Suicide Squad, and it's actually super good and honestly the best DCEU film. But like I said, the MCU went nuts in 2021. For starters, Disney Plus started pumping out shows that are directly connected to the MCU, and according to Kevin Feige, you'd have to watch these in order to understand the movies. So in 2021, we got WandaVision, which was bad, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which was mid, Black Widow, which was bad, Loki, which was actually pretty good, What If, which was bad, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, which was mid, Eternals, which was mid, Hawkeye, which was mid, and Spider-Man No Way Home, which was pretty decent. Now at the time, most people enjoyed all of these things that came out except for like Eternals, which was the first MCU film to get a negative Rotten Tomato score. But as time went on, most people ended up souring on these projects, even No Way Home, which was like the movie of that year. Why is that? Well, more than likely because of oversaturation, and this issue is mainly in regard to the MCU. Phase 1 of the MCU had 6 movies over the course of 4 years. Phase 2 had 6 movies over the course of 3 years, and Phase 3 had 11 movies over the course of 4 years. Phase 4 had 8 movies and 9 shows over the course of just 2 years, with a total of 17 projects, whereas the Infinity Saga had 17 movies at this time. And at the time, the Netflix shows weren't even canon, but even then, now that they are canon, that's just 26 projects total for the Infinity Saga over the course of 11 years. 17 projects in 2 years, 26 projects in 11 years. Do you see the problem? Remember when I said that the MCU was starting to form patterns? Well, before 2021, nearly every MCU film was getting $1 billion. So Marvel had a formula, and it worked. So instead of refining that formula or trying new things out, they got lazy and just copy-pasted everything. Now, to be fair, a major reason as to why there was so much in 2021 was because of the delays due to COVID. But still, everything coming out at once was super overwhelming, and although fans kept up at first, they started to not care. I would say 2021 is when superhero fatigue really started, and it was about mid-2021 when I started to feel it. I watched all the movies and I watched all the shows, and all of that effort simply wasn't worth it. By the time I got to Moon Knight, I was just done with the shows. As someone who used to review like everything that came out at the time, I was kind of obligated to watch all the new releases, but I decided that I was just gonna cut myself some slack and just watch the movies because I just didn't have it in me to watch the shows. I still haven't seen any MCU show past Moon Knight. Even though I enjoyed the first season of Loki, I just don't care about season 2. Ms. Marvel, I Am Groot, She-Hulk Attorney at Law, Secret Invasion, What If Season 2, Loki Season 2, Echo, I have not seen them, and it will be a long time before I do. I just don't have any interest anymore, and I'd say people stopped watching the shows at the same time I did. And I think it's mainly because of the frequency at which these shows were being released. In 2021, we got WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Loki Season 1, What If Season 1, and Hawkeye. And then in 2022, we got Moon Knight, Ms. Marvel, I Am Groot, and She-Hulk Attorney at Law. Then in 2023, we got Secret Invasion, Loki Season 2, and What If Season 2. And in 2021, we've gotten Echo, and we will get Agatha and the forever changing title. You could blame some of this on COVID, and that is definitely a valid explanation as to why there was so much in 2021, but there's definitely no denying that people lost interest in the shows after 2022. We look at the shows and they get less and less frequent as the years go on, and they're barely important to the movies. Wanda being the villain in Doctor Strange is just as jarring if you haven't seen the show than if you have. Falcon is the new Captain America, and that has yet to be relevant to any MCU project. Loki is the cause of the multiverse, kinda. I'll give What If the benefit of the doubt since it's technically emphasis on technically an anthology show. Kate Bishop is in the post-credit scene of the Marvels, so yeah. Moon Knight will probably only be in the new Avengers movies, and that's it. Ms. Marvel was in the Marvels, but you don't need the show to understand what's happening in the movie. I Am Groot is also an anthology series, so I'll give that one a pass as well. She-Hulk so far hasn't been relevant in any way. Secret Invasion reveals some of the characters are Skrulls, and it ultimately means nothing. I guess Loki Season 2 has some significance, but it's not going to impact anything in the future. What If Season 2 is yet again an quote-unquote anthology, and Echo I can forgive since it's more about the street-level superhero superheroing. So we have 14 seasons of television with no major impact on the MCU. What is the point? And that sentiment for the shows has continued with the movies. In the Infinity Saga, we got a major crossover by the 6th film, and we're currently over halfway through the Multiverse Saga, and we have yet to get one. It's hard to build up interest in these stories when there has yet to be any payoff. Like in 2026 and 2027, the Multiverse Saga will end, and so far there has been no film or show that has propelled the story, just a vague concept of the multiverse that barely connects with each other. Heck, Across the Spider-Verse does a better job at fleshing out the MCU multiverse than the MCU itself. In the Infinity Saga, the Infinity Stones was the main idea of that saga. It was clearly and coherently told, one in like every 3 to 5 films, having a lasting impact on the story. None of that is found in the Infinity Saga. Now you may be asking, what's up with DC? Well, like I said, in 2021 we got the Suicide Squad and Zack Snyder's Justice League. In 2022 we got Peacemaker and Black Adam. And in 2023 we got a lot. We got Shazam! Fury of the Gods, The Flash, Blue Beetle, and Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. The DCEU's problem has always been leadership. From Man of Steel to Wonder Woman, it was Zack Snyder as the head, then Jeff Johns was the head for Justice League, and that's it. And then Walter Hamada was the head from Aquaman to Black Adam, and now it's James Gunn and Peter Safran. Although the 4 DCEU films that came out in 2023 have nothing to do with James Gunn in terms of the production, it's still apparent that the DCEU hasn't had a clear vision since 2016. The only films that had a consistent plan was Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, Suicide Squad, Wonder Woman, and Justice League. And after that, there has been no plan, and the constant change in direction and lack of direction is a major reason as to why the DCEU has failed. Now let's talk 2023. 2023 was a detrimental year for superhero movies, and honestly, just movies in general. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania flopped, Shazam! Fury of the Gods flopped, The Flash flopped, Blue Beetle flopped, The Marvels flopped, and Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom flopped. All of these films would have succeeded a couple of years ago, and yet this year they all flopped. Why? Why is it that a genre that dominated the box office just last year is now underperforming? Have you been watching the video? You know why. It's oversaturation. There comes a certain point where you can have too much of a good thing. Big epic superhero battles were cool when they happen once every 5 years, not every month. People don't care about this genre anymore because they've seen the patterns and they've grown tired of it. 5 years ago, people criticized Martin Scorsese for calling superhero movies theme park rides, and 5 years later, everyone agrees with him. The same tropes, the same characters, just in different shades. The same set pieces, the same jokes. It's getting tiresome. Is the MCU kiddie? Sure. Is the solution making more mature rated projects? It definitely would be cool, but no. The answer is literally obvious to everyone but these executives, but it's the writing. No one cares about Miss Marvel or Kate Bishop or White Vision or the Hulk's son unless you write them in a way that makes them interesting. It's not the implication of importance, it's the person. Everyone likes Tony Stark, not because he's cool, or he's the leader of the Avengers, or that he's the most important character in the MCU, but because he went from a heartless, selfish prick to someone who sacrificed himself to save the entire universe. You can't have the coolness of the character without the character. Every character that has been introduced in the MCU since Phase 4 has not had any sort of impact on people at all. Even if a character is likable, they'll end up being forgotten in the long run because Marvel is so obsessed at making things that they forgot the art that comes along with making things. There was a time in my life where I was excited for Ant-Man and the Wasp, and I went to the theater to see Ant-Man and the Wasp day one. I cared about the characters, I cared about the story of the MCU, and now I'm honestly not even excited for the new Avengers films. Now, to say that there has been nothing but bad superhero films in the past 3 years, it would be a lie, because there has been a lot of great ones. Zack Snyder's Justice League, Loki Season 1, The Suicide Squad, Spider-Man No Way Home, Peacemaker, The Batman, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and I haven't even mentioned non-DC or Marvel stuff like The Boys or Invincible. Those projects have stuck with us way after its release date because those films and shows were focused on the story and characters over gimmicks and cameos. The Batman is honestly one of my favorite comic book films of all time, and the more I watch it and think about it, the more I like it. Across the Spider-Verse is the best depiction of the multiverse in probably any movie I've ever seen, and it manages to both be meta and sincere at the same time. Pretty much anything made by James Gunn is the goofiest thing you've ever seen, yet it has so much heart to it that you can't help but to care what's going on. This genre genre, and these characters still have a lot of potential. So what does the future look like for the genre? Well, in 2024, Deadpool 3 will be the first MCU film in over 14 years to be the only MCU film to come out in a year. DC is giving us an extremely unnecessary Joker sequel, and the Venom universe is getting 3 films this year. So, safe to say this year is not looking great. However, the future doesn't look all bad, at least for DC. James Gunn and Peter Safran's DC reboot will begin with Creature Commandos and then Superman Legacy. And I am just super excited for Superman Legacy because I think it'll do to the character of Superman what the Batman did to Batman. Speaking of which, The Batman Part 2 comes out in 2025, and Matt Reeves is still directing it and co-writing it with Mattson Tomlin. And you can quote me on this, but it will be a banger, and I know bangers. I have full trust and hope in Gunn's vision for this universe, and I think he's going to be terrific. As for the MCU, I honestly don't know. With Deadpool 3 being the only MCU film to come out this year, I'm hoping that good old Kev uses this to take his time with these next films, but he had plenty of time after Endgame, and here we are. I want to stay optimistic because the MCU was such a vital part of my childhood. Like when Infinity War came out, that's all I could think about. The day it came out, I was in school and I couldn't concentrate on my schoolwork because I was so excited for Infinity War. But now I just don't care. I felt nothing when Beast showed up at the end of the Marvels, and I feel nothing about Deadpool traveling through the multiverse. I hope it's good, but deep down, I don't think the MCU can recover, but I really hope I'm wrong. As for the Venom universe, I hope the Venom universe makes super crappy movies forever because they are awesome and I love them. So yeah, I guess that's my rant. Yeah, this looks like a long video. Did not mean for it to be that long, but I really appreciate you guys sticking around and watching my video. This is just a topic that's been on my brain for a long time, since like definitely 2021. And yeah, thank you for watching my video. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And yeah, be on the lookout for more videos.